Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be going over how to build out a lower receiver from a strip lower to all of the small parts and then getting it all together into a functioning lower receiver. This is part 2 of a series that I had going. If you haven't watched my first video, I went through building up a complete upper from putting on the gas block, setting the barrel nut, putting on all the small parts, etc. So no, this is just the way that I've done it over the years. This is, I don't even know how many lowers I've built up now. Probably, I don't know, probably a half dozen. Not as many as complete uppers that I have. I'm definitely no pro. I think I mentioned in my first video, I would say that I am an experienced novice. So there's definitely lessons that I've learned. Again, I'm just going to walk you through the way that I do it and then point out some of the things to watch out for if you are a newer builder yourself. So hope you guys enjoy the video. And if you would, go ahead and hit subscribe and like and share the content if you feel so inclined to, and if you enjoy the video, it really helps me out and really gets around the YouTube algorithm. So for my lower parts kit, I got the Sons of Liberty Gunworks blaster gut kit. Definitely very convenient. It gives you everything that you need for the smaller parts. The very first thing that I go to install are is the pivot pin. And then I will move on to the magazine release. So let's go ahead and get started. So typically when you get these small part kits, all of the components are covered with preservative grease. It's not a good grease for lubrication. It just keeps rust off of them. So typically what I like to do is take a little bit of COP on a rag and wipe all that stuff off because I don't want anything being sticky. So I'm not going to make you guys sit through as I do all this, but I'll be back. All right, so I do always start with the pivot pin first. I don't know why. I don't really have a rhyme or reason to it. That's just where I always like to go ahead and begin the start. A little bit of oil besides cleaning it off makes it just slide in a little bit better. Go ahead and do a dry fit. As you see, so for the lower receiver, getting something here like a bev block to hold your receiver definitely makes things a lot easier. So going back here into installing the pivot pin. So whenever you're installing these little springs in these detents, you definitely, there's the risk that they're going to go flying across the room. Because as you see, when you push in the spring, and then you put the detent in, the spring basically wants to sit flush with the hole in the receiver. So one of the things that I do is, while they make, and I want to say it's Real Avid makes a tool to help with this. Makes it a lot easier. I don't have any experience with it. I'd say one tip for anybody that's installing these little springs and detents and anywhere, work inside of a box, work inside a big Ziploc bag, so if they go springing out and flying away, you can find them again. Me personally, what I do is I position, see I have this angled a little bit. You can't see my body, but it is angled right in front of my body so that if it does go flying out, it's just going to hit my chest. Now, going back to the installation, again, I know there is tools, but you know, the pivot pins are 250 holes. So basically I have this 250 drill and I go ahead and push it in. So as you can see, as I push and push tension on the detent, I went ahead and pushed in the drill and used it as a slave pin. So now when I go to install the detent, and it can still be tricky, because it wants to push out and against it. There you go. And then you can just push it right on in. And then there you go. That's my little trick that I do, but that's it. That's putting in the front pivot pin. So next up, do the magazine release. So magazine release consists of 3 assemblies here. You see you have the actuator arm, the spring, and then the mag button itself. So I always install this next, or I should say definitely before you do the bolt catch. Not really applicable here, but if you are using an ambidextrous safety such as the Forward Controls Design or other similar ones in combination with the a Forward Controls Design or maybe a Geisley Maritime bolt catch, is the added levers that they have on it can make it difficult to install your mag release afterwards. And learned this lesson the hard way by one of the receivers I was installing or putting together. I installed the Forward Controls Design ABCR first, And then when I went to install one of their ambidextrous mag releases, I could not. It interfered with it, and I ended up having to drive the roll pin back out of the bolt catch. Not that it's terribly difficult to do, but it can be a little bit dicey. So just force of habit, my advice is to always install your mag release first. So easy enough. Install the arm, hold it from the back side, just kind of put your finger over it, drop your spring in there, make sure that you have the mag button facing the right way. In this case, the serrations being out. You see it's smooth on the back side. Push it into the recess, hold your thumb on it, and then start screwing it in. Now it's got pretty coarse threads, so it would be hard to cross thread, but it's not impossible. So just make sure that you're not cross threaded. So you're gonna see that it comes to a certain point that once you push it in, that you can't spin it anymore without it interfering with some of the surfaces here on the receiver. So what you're gonna have to do is actually push the mag button in further into the receiver in order to complete the rotations and get the mag release button all the way where you want it to be. To be honest with you, I don't know if there is a spec off the top of your head. Obviously you want it enough so that when you hit the button, it pushes in all the way. So I may say that that's enough. You know, you can, this isn't bottomless, so you can definitely go a little bit deeper on it. Just kind of hold this, push it in, give it another rotation, check the depth, and that's basically where I like it to be. So it's not fully flush with the end, it's just down a little bit. Push the button, you can see that the mag release fully extends, and just for an extra test, I'll go grab a magazine. We'll get a handful of different magazines. You see here, I've got a Gen 2 PMag, got an OK Industries standard GI mag, got a Lancer, and then a Gen 2 PMag windowed. So go ahead and load it in there, drop it out, make sure that it drops freely. Worked on that magazine. Works with the Lancer. Okay, sure feed. And then lastly, the non-windowed M2. There we go. So magazine release installation completed. All right, so next step, I'm gonna go ahead and install the bolt catch. Bolt catch consists of the bolt catch itself, plunger, spring, and the roll pin. It does come coated with some protective grease. I went ahead and wiped that off. And I am also going to put a little bit of oil, just a little bit, just enough to get your fingers a little bit wet. Go ahead and rub that down on the plunger. Rub it down on the pin. I know some people like to put grease on these. I am not a fan of that myself. You can see the hole here. The hole is what is going to engage with your roll pin. Now, a couple things when it comes to this. There are specialty tools that you can buy to install the roll pin. And those specialty tools would be these type of punches right here. Considering that the roll pin sits so close to the receiver, there's definitely risk that you can mar up the surface, or more importantly, that you can't get on it straight. So these punches here, which I believe I got from Real Avid, they have a flat side on them to allow you to get on these straight without marring up your surface. I mean, still some care should be used. In addition to that, I typically will take a little bit of duct tape and put it down on the surface to give me another little added layer of protection. So again, you know, brand new gun, no sense in getting it all marred up first time out, especially for this one for me, as I'm building it for somebody else. Go ahead and put that down. Some people like to use the blue painter's tape. I like duct tape because it's a little bit more resistant to tearing. So your roll pin should be chamfered on at least one end, if not both. And that's to give you a good start. Now this roll pin here seems to be evenly chamfered on both sides. It doesn't really matter which side, and then I'm going to put it in. This time here, I'm going to put the split going inwards, just so you can't see it as it's working out. This here is the starter punch. This is going to hold the roll pin and allow you to get it started. And then you'll use the roll pin punch to finish it off. So something that may be a little bit easier to do is to get started off with a taking the plunger out of there, because it is under pressure. So go ahead and, just like the other roll punches, roll pins, get it started in with nothing in there. You can see the spring came out, or the plunger. Just enough that you can see it protruding right there. So not too far, because if you do push it in too far, you will not be able to get your bolt catch in. So let's go ahead and put this back in. Reinstall our bolt catch. So I know some people, there's a couple different tricks that you can use for this to make sure that your the hole in for the roll pin in your receiver along with stays lined up with the hole in your bolt catch itself. Some people will use an Allen key. That definitely helps, as you have this beveled surface, raised surface here. If you try just sticking a punch straight up in here, it's going to rub hard against here. So Allen key works well. Again, to keep it lined up, use it as a slave pin. Now you see I will continue to use the starter punch for as long as I can. As you see, I still have, I don't know, maybe about 1/8 of an inch of insertion before I start to hit the receiver. So see if it's starting to gauge the roll pin yet, which I believe it has. Yep, started catching it. Back this up a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and move on to my roll pin punch. So far, so good. There you have it. Bolt catch installation complete. All right, so for the next step, I'm going to go ahead and install the trigger guard. In this case, this is the Sons of Liberty Gunworks winter trigger guard. If you had a GI mil-spec one, the installation would be the same method. So you see here, you have a little spring-loaded detent. That's going to go ahead, once you slip it in, and pick up this hole here. You can simply just push it down with your fingernail. Sometimes it'll be a little tighter fit than others. You may need a little bit of assistance to get it started. And slip under the ear. There we go. And as you see here, it swivels up and picks up the other hole. Some of them fit a little bit tighter. This one is a pretty tight fit. This step here, you have to be very careful on. I've never done it myself, but I've heard stories of it. You have the potential to ruin a lower receiver once you install this roll pin. And the reason why that is once you drive in, as a roll pin is interference fit, you drive the roll pin through the pack up here. When you get to this outer layer here, if you are beating the roll pin in without supporting the ear on the backside, and that could be simply with a block, a bench block, something in order to give some support there. What can happen is if you tap that roll pin in, you can end up snapping this ear off right here. Once you've done that, you have essentially ruined it. There are some fixes that you can get around it, such as the Daniel Defense pistol grip that does have the integrated trigger guard in it. So it simply picks up on the forward end, like you see here. Simply picks up on the forward end, and then you screw in your grip. That would be one way of getting around that. But of course, you would always have that broken off ear. So if you're going to use a punch and drive that in, for all the love of the Lord, make sure that you are using something to support that ear. Something you can do to get around that is by using one of these installation tools. This one here I got is from Wheeler Engineering. You can use it to install new roll pins or drive out old roll pins. See, if you're driving them out, it comes with these two attachments here. One of them is longer than the other if you're trying to push it out, because of course you have to go through the whole pack-up. But when you're going to install them, it's simply a matter of using the shorter one. Again, when you use your roll pin, you do want to ensure that you're using the beveled end in first. In this case, with this roll pin, both of them are beveled on each side. One of them, they both seem to be pinched at the ends, so it does not appear that it matters which end I am going ahead and install in this one first. Just like every other roll pin that I've shown, I am going to give it a little drop of lube to give it some assistance in going in. You can also take yourself a punch. It doesn't have to be the exact same size, but push it in and pull it to one surface, whether it be the bottom of the hole, top of the hole, to ensure that your holes is lined up as it possibly can be. And of course, always do a visual check. How I install other roll pinches or roll pins, it's somewhat easier to go ahead and get them started by hand first. Everything still looks lined up. I will go ahead and move over to the Wheeler Engineering roll pin installation tool. And now it's just a matter of screwing it and pressing it through. You see the tool adds support on the other side. So as you're pressing it through, you are getting the appropriate amount of support in order to prevent any type of mishaps. Pretty even on both sides. And there you have it. This tool, in my opinion, is for the price. I want to say it's $15, $18 on Amazon. Definitely makes it easy. So that's it. Trigger guard installed. All right, so now we're going to move on to installing the buffer tube, or what it's more formally known as is the receiver extension. And this involves a couple different parts. So obviously you're going to need the receiver extension. You're going to need your castle nut, your end plate, and this is where we're also going to install the takedown pin along with the buffer retainer and spring and the detent and spring needed for the takedown pin. On this rifle, I will be installing a carbine receiver extension. This would be the same process if you are installing an A5, whether you're installing any different type of castle nut, with the exception of some of the specialty ones out there, like the primary weapon systems, ratcheting castle nut. This is a standard mil spec end plate. Some of them do have QD attached sockets on the bottom of them or on the back of them. And everything else is basically the same, but the process will be the same. So first things that I like to do is go ahead and take the castle nut and make sure that it threads on smoothly. Sometimes, depending on anodizing or if you're getting a Cerakoted one, they can be a little bit tough. The correct orientation for these are the square teeth to be going aft to the end of the buffer tube. The smaller little recesses that you see here are for staking the castle nut. So I only bring that up because I have seen more than one post where somebody has put their castle nut on backwards. So everything threads up really well. Next step, I'm going to go ahead and thread it onto the receiver and make sure that lines up very well. Go ahead and take care to make sure you're not cross-threading. And everything looks good. So just like when we installed the barrel nut onto the upper receiver and used the anti-seize grease, you're going to want to do the same thing here. You do have a steel castle nut along with a aluminum tool, so in order to prevent galling, you're going to want to use some of the grease, which again is the Aeroshell 6433 MS. I know other people have used other greases, and I'm sure that it works decently fine enough, but this is what the TDP calls out for. So we go ahead and paint on a little bit onto the threads. It is not necessary to grease the tube going into the receiver because those are both similar metals, which is aluminum. So get a decent coat on there. You don't have to gob it up a ton. but you definitely want to make sure that you get enough on there. I'm going to go ahead and wipe a little bit of the excess off here. I'm going to thread it onto my receiver, which, like I mentioned before, you want the square notches facing aft. You can thread that all the way back until it bottoms out. Don't force it. Just like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and clean off some of that excess grease that ended up on the threads here, just to make it a little bit neater upon installation. And again, it is not needed to put grease on the threads where it goes into the receiver, because you do not have dissimilar metals like you do with the castle nut. From this point, you're going to want to put on your end plate. These do only go one way. You see there's a recessed side and there is a protruding side. The protruding side is what fits in to the pocket of the receiver back here, and that's the end that you want going in. So you want to make sure that you put that on the right way. You see here you do have a notch and a groove. That slides down in there. And then you will start to thread the receiver extension into the lower, again, making sure that you're not cross-starting. So at this point, the next thing that you're going to want to look out for is you're going to start getting it to the point where you have the recess or the pocket where your buffer retaining pin is going to go. It's about right there. So your buffer retainer along with your spring, same thing like other areas, I will go ahead and just put a very, very touch of a light coat of oil on here. Put the spring down in first. You'll stick the buffer retainer down in on top of it, and then you will push it down and continue to thread on your receiver extension until it catches it like so. Now, how do you know when you're far enough in? You can see that you do not want any type of resistance on your buffer tube. And in this case, that is as far as it wants to go. See that you know that you're true when the bottom of the tube is facing 6 o'clock, along with the alignment of your end plate is straight up and down, because it can only go one way. And just to double check, you could do another full rotation, and you can see that you cannot do another full rotation without it hitting the buffer retainer. So you will know for sure that is where you want it to be, in the correct position. So at this point, we are going to want to move on, and we're going to want to grab your takedown pin. So with the takedown pin, I do like to take a little bit of oil, lube it up, get some down into that detent area. This channel here is where your detent is going to engage. Went a little bit heavy here, so let me go wipe some of that off. Go ahead and insert. Insert your takedown pin. It can only go one way. That channel should be going facing towards the back of the gun. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and free up my hands and bring my bev block back into play. All right, so I'm really hoping my camera will stay in the focus here so that you guys can see what I'm doing. So at this point, now that you've got your takedown pin in, making sure that the channel is facing to the rear, the next step you're going to want to do is you're going to want to turn your buffer tube just enough out of the way. You see there is a very small hole here in the back of the receiver, and this is where your takedown pin detent and spring are going to go. So you want to put in your pin first. I have still a little bit of oil left on my fingers. I'm going to go ahead and insert that into the hole and then follow it with the spring. So as you can see, that's where the spring wants to bottom out. Now, this is a point, the only thing that holds that spring in is your end plate. So you need to be very careful. You need to hold it in and at the same time turn and slip, find your end plate to cover that. But you want to make sure that you don't accidentally kink your spring. I'm sure somebody will be able to comment and tell me a better way of doing this, or one of their little tricks. Or maybe it's just one of those things that everybody ends up struggling with. So the key thing is making sure that you are not kinking the spring. There we go. Hold it into position down at the bottom. Now thread on your castle nut to keep it all captured. and you're done. Sometimes it's a little easier than others. All right, so now we're at the point where we are going to go ahead and torque down the castle nut. I know some people just give it 2 unga dungas and that's good enough for them. The technical data package, or the TDP, does call out for 38 to 42 foot-pounds of torque, not inch-pounds. It is foot-pounds of torque. In this case, I'm going to have to put it back into the vise, being secured by my bev block. Here I got my torque wrench that is set to 40 foot-pounds. And this is where I will once again break out my Midwest Industries armors tool. Now there are cheaper versions out there that don't have the half-inch hole for your torque wrench. I'm telling you, these tools here, this is one of the best investments that you can make as an AR builder. So you got two sides that you can go to attack this. As you see here, the teeth do engage into the castle nut. One of the things that you do want to make sure that you have your receiver extension lined up. Let's see the camera. You want it lined up so it's sitting square with your receiver. Now there are tools. There are tools that are made out there. I think Isley makes one, NC Star makes one that basically clamps onto here to make sure it stays perfectly straight. They range in price. I want to say the NC Star one is about $40 or so. The Geisley one is more closer to $300 if I'm thinking of the right tool. Me personally, I've never used one. Some people, their OCD may drive them crazy and prevent them from not using a tool like that, but there is a little bit of wiggle room that you can adjust this. So for me, I always pull it a little bit and clock it this way so that when I tighten the castle nut, if it pulls the other way slightly, you're still going to be good to go. So hold a little bit down, get it lined back up. And again, like I mentioned before, when you are using your torque wrench, you want to ensure that you are engaging it at a 45 degree and not straight on, such as this. So it's not giving you the correct torque value if you do not have the tool at a 45 degree. Now, one of the other things that I will do to give me a hand here, and what you want to be careful of, whether you're using a good tool or not, and one of the things that I've done in the past that have been frustrating for me is that I have slipped out of the teeth on my armorer's wrench, and typically that was because I was using a cheaper wrench, slipped out of the notches in the castle nut, and I end up gouging them up a little bit, or you gouge up the threads. So you want to make sure that you are definitely staying square. One of the tools I have to help with that is this one here, which I cannot for the life of me remember who makes this, but it is by the company that makes those 3D printed magazine storage racks, along with other tools. I'll look it up and I'll drop it into the video or the description. So that simply slides onto the end of the receiver extension. And once I get the armor's wrench engaged, I can all I got to do is simply hold it up against it and then worry about turning my torque wrench. There you go. 40 foot-pounds. You want to ensure that your detent sits the way where it intended, which it should have been set already before we even torque the castle nut. And that's it. That's all it takes. Now we'll go ahead and move on to staking the castle nut. All right, so like I mentioned, next thing we're moving on to is staking the castle nut, which I know can be somewhat of a hotly debated take. Should you stake your castle nut or should you not? Yes, you should stake your castle nut. TDB calls for it. It's a safe bet. It's easy enough to do. It doesn't cost you any money, so why would you not stake your castle nut? Now, I get it that some people, they may want to change things out, the receiver extension, the end plate, so they want to leave it open because typically once you stake it, you definitely don't want to use your castle nut over again. They are considered to be a one-time use item. And then probably also get an end plate due to the fact that now once you retighten down the castle nut, it's not going to be in the exact same spot and you're going to have an extra state mark. That being said, these parts are cheap. If you're going to go through the trouble of doing a build, do it properly and stake your castle nut. So how do you do that? So as I mentioned before, these grooves that you have in your castle nut is where you stake. You know, a lot of people say one is good enough. I go ahead and do both. What do? You go ahead and grab a starter punch. I know that some people use the spring-loaded starter punches, and in fact, on my first castle nut, I changed it out, which I believe was because of the end plate. I did try one of those spring-loaded starter punches, and I guess it did okay. But I guess in my opinion, you can go get yourself one of these starter punch sets. You can get them cheap from Harbor Freight. I want to say it's like 5, 6, maybe $7, and it works it does the job. In my opinion, the spring-loaded ones give a little bit more room for error, because as you are pushing and fighting against the spring pressure for it to pop, you can slip off of it. And that has happened to me one time. So no longer use them, especially since it's easy enough to do with a standard punch or starter punch. So what do you want to do? So the whole point of doing the staking is to move some metal from your end plate into the groove of your castle nut, so that even though this thing is torqued down under recoil, under use, your castle nut will not back itself back off. So you don't need a ton, but you need a sufficient amount. So typically what I'll do is I will find somewhere in the middle, and I will put the tip of my starter punch not quite dead center of the end plate, maybe favor it 40% closer to the castle nut. And to start off, I would just give it a light tap. Now you definitely want to make sure that you have a secure surface when you're doing this. Just double check. I'll do a light tap to get it started. Let's see, I think it just shifted on me. Yep, that's exactly where I want it to be. And just keep tapping it until it moves the direction that you want it to go. Just give it smooth, solid taps. At this point, you can start to favor the angle of the starter punch a little bit towards the rear, nothing too drastic. Let's see, that's about it. Got the material pushed into there. Now we will move on to the other side. One more. The camera to focus. See, a little bit of material that's been pushed into that groove. You know, will prevent this from being able to back itself back off. This does not make it a permanent installation. You can still use your armorer's tool and twist this with enough torque in order to break the castle nut free and shear off that little bit of material that has been pushed in. And that's it. That's all there is to it. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and move on, and we're going to install the safety along with the grip. You do these at the same time because the detent and spring for the safety is held in place and secured by your grip. So you see here, we do have the safety, you do have the detent, and then you do have your spring along with your grip and your grip screw. So this is just your standard mil-specs safety, not ambidextrous. That's 90-degree throw, no 50-degree or 60-degree. So go ahead and insert that from the left-hand side. Get it lined up. Now put my detent in next in that small little hole in the bottom. Now the spring that holds the detent or applies pressure to the detent, that's as far that it goes into the receiver. You're going to notice that on your grip you have a hole or a pocket where the spring is going to sit. And if you'll notice, once you put that in there, it sits a lot further down into the grip than it is than it does sits in the receiver. So it is easier to insert it into the grip. Go ahead, put your grip on, make sure that it finds that hole in the receiver. Once you get it to this point, you can test your safety, because once you screw this in, and that's it. That gives you that positive engagement of your safety. See, everything seems to be functioning correctly. Now we're going to go ahead and move on to installing our screw. You want to make sure that you use care to not cross thread your screw into the receiver. If you feel any type of resistance whatsoever, stop what you're doing and back out the screw. Now you're going to be feeling like you're turning the screw for a while before it starts to engage. That's normal. As you see now, it's tightening up. Torque down your screw. There you have it. Grip is installed. Safety is nice and smooth. Now to move on to the next step, installing the trigger. All right, so moving on to install the fire control group. Consists of your trigger along with the disconnector, and then you have your hammer. Each of these, both of these have springs on them. You have your trigger pin, you have your hammer pin. So you can see here, there is already a pin installed here, and that is a slave pin in order to make installation of the trigger easier, because this is the trigger and you do have the disconnector and you have a spring in there. So as you push down and you're going to be fighting these springs, it makes it a lot easier to keep this in line and install the trigger pin through the trigger assembly itself. So most triggers come with that. You want to leave that in there when you go to install it. It can be a little bit easier if you want to put a little oil on it now onto the bearing surfaces. Connecting surfaces, I should say, along with a little bit along the trigger. I do like to put some, one of the recommended oiling points are on both of these pins. So I'll go ahead and put a not dripping amount, but a little bit of a liberal amount on there. Wipe my hands off a little bit. You could do this in a bev block to make it a little bit easier. I don't find it 100% necessary to do so. Get back the camera out a little bit here. Simply enough, you drop the trigger in, get it underneath the safety arm, line up your hole, get your hammer. Again, either be the brass or nylon side. I typically get it close. And as you see, the slave pin popped out the back side of it. All right, and then we're going to move on to installing the hammer. So the hammer, you don't need a slave pin because it is only the hammer. I'm going to go ahead and get a little bit of oil on here just to make it easier onto the surfaces that connect the fire control group, along with just a little bit of extra lube protection. Now, your spring, obviously your hammer faces this way because as it sits in the receiver, it's going to pivot forward and hit the back of the firing pin on your bolt carrier group. Your spring orientation can only be one way. Now, typically, these will always be installed loosely on here, and the question of whether it goes this way or whether it goes this way, it's pretty easy. You got to think that this is going to sit down in the receiver. It's going to pick up that pin, and it's going to need spring pressure to push the hammer forward. If you had the springs going this way, it would not give you any type of forward pressure. So you want to make sure that this loop on this spring sits on the back of the hammer. That being said, it does make it a little bit of a challenge in order to get this lined up. It is harder than doing your trigger pin. Another key thing is you want to make sure is down in here, you want to make sure that these springs sit on top of your trigger pin. You don't want them to slide underneath. They should be sitting on top. So a couple different, sometimes in some of these are easier than others. Let me go ahead and lube up my hammer pin while I'm at it. And somebody may have a better idea of how to do this. And again, lowering it in, making sure that the legs on your hammer spring are over the top of your trigger pin. You're going to push this in. You can push it down to catch the connector. You're just going to look through. You're going to line up your hole. And then you're going to tap it in. That one is actually pretty easy. Sorry about that. There you go. Safety. One thing also I do want to mention to anybody who doesn't know, you never want to let your hammer, drop your hammer onto your receiver here. This thin little web of material here can crack over time, or it could even do it on only one time. So do not ever let that just slap in there. You can dry fire an AR-15 when it's fully assembled. When you have just the lower out, you first just don't pull the trigger, or if you want to do it for a function check, a lot of people will put an earplug down in here. But yeah, definitely make sure that you don't let it drop on the receiver. But you do want to check it to make sure that it's working correctly, which it is. Test the reset. Test the hammer drop. When I pull it, it does release the hammer. So that's it. That's all there is to installing a fire control group. It would be the same if you're using a Geisley, a LaRue, or other similar mil-spec type trigger assembly. All right, so next up, I'm going to go ahead and install the buffer spring and the buffer. This is your standard carbine mil-spec buffer spring, and this is an H1 or just an H heavy buffer. Not everybody does this. It's not absolutely necessary, but I do it. Well, I know a lot of people do it. Can't say for sure if it is in the TDP spec, but I will take some white lithium grease. In this case, it's the Lucas, and I will just smear some into my gloved hand, and I will work that all along the spring, coating it up. We'll put a little bit on my buffer here. And then it does not matter which end of the spring goes onto your buffer. Twist it until the shoulder of the buffer is snug against the spring, or the spring is snug against the buffer. Go ahead and wipe off some of that excess white lithium grease. I'm gonna go ahead and remove the glove from my right hand so I don't get it all over the gun. I will simply insert it into the buffer tube, push it past the retainer, boom. That's all it takes to do that. Then I'll go back with a rag, remove some of the excess lithium grease that was out there. That's it. Applying the lithium grease, besides adding a little bit of friction resistance in there with the buffer and the spring, it does also help cut down a little bit on the noise. Nothing crazy. No, it doesn't bother me, but a lot of people, some people out there it does. So that's some of the advantages of using it. All right, so last but not least, we're going to go ahead and install the buttstock. In this case, we do have a Magpul CTR. Some of them, some buttstocks are slightly different, but basically the majority of them go on the same. And how they go and install onto the buffer tube itself or the receiver extension, as you see this pivot pin in here, which you would normally use to adjust the stock, you just pull it down and slide it onto the buffer tube. So put it on your buffer tube till it stops, pull down on the pin until it engages. Once it engages, it cannot pull off again until you pull down on that tube or that pin, such as that. All right, everybody, so that is it. That is a complete assembly of an AR-15 lower, starting from a strip lower and a bunch of small parts, ending up as a completed lower assembly, ready to be paired up with the upper of your choice, which in this case, this is set up as a rifle, so you are gonna wanna put it onto a rifle upper, but whatever you wanna do, that's your business. Once you're done, always good to go check your work, make sure that the buttstock slides the way that it should. You do have free play with your buffer. Your safety does work as intended. Your hammer drops when you pull the trigger. Again, not letting it slam into that shelf. Resets like it should. Takes a magazine, which pushes up onto your bolt catch as it's supposed to, and then also releases just like it should as well. So hope this helped some of you guys out there. Any of you new builders or anybody who's looking to do their first build, or maybe just even wants to see different ways of how, from what they've been doing. There are many different ways of building lowers. I'm sure somebody can, if anybody knows of any tips or better ways of doing the things that I showed in this video, please comment in the comment section below. I do love hearing from you guys. I really hope it could help some of you guys out. So if you like this content, please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button. Please share it. It really does help the channel out, get through the YouTube algorithms. So between my lower assembly video and then the previous one I did with the upper assembly, that is really all it takes to put together a AR-15. As long as you have the proper tools, the chemicals, the knowledge, it is really not that difficult to do, but it's also not just as simple as slapping some stuff together. There is definitely some care that needs to be taken as you put things together. And I would always say, you know, in my opinion, if you are new to ARs, you should definitely, you know, buy one first, in my opinion. Buy one first, change out some of the parts on it, get familiar with it, then start building it. But definitely having the proper tools to do the job is a huge step in making sure that you're doing it correctly. I'm sure lots of people have done it without having the proper tools, and they may run fine, and that may work for you. But for me personally, I do feel that having the tools is definitely the right way of doing it. So again, hope you guys enjoyed the video between this series and this video and the upper in this series of videos. See you in the next one.